Today's gospel gives us a story of discipleship and of betrayal as we continue into this Holy Week. And it's a chance to reflect not just on what happened 2,000 years ago, not just about the beloved disciple, about Jesus, about Judas, about Peter, but it's also a story about us. It's about how are we following Jesus? How are we betraying Jesus? How are we still loved by Jesus in the midst of that? And so we're given three disciples here, three responses to Jesus. We all want to be the beloved disciple. We all want to be the disciple resting on Jesus's chest. That's the ideal. Most of the time, I'll speak for myself here, most of the time I'm more likely to be Judas or to be Peter. And we can think about these different ways in which we betray Jesus regularly, sometimes seriously and sometimes not so seriously, every day of our Christian journey forward. Sometimes we're like Judas. Sometimes we are actively doing something that we know is harmful. Sometimes we actively choose the wrong. The devil made us do it, is the phrase. You can see some echoes of this here. Without knowing why, we do something wrong, knowing that it's wrong. And more often, I think, or as often, probably more often for those of you watching a sermon on a Tuesday morning from email, more often we're like Peter. We have the best of intentions. We really want to lay down our life for God. We really want to be the people we know we're called to be, and we somehow in the midst of life don't quite do it. We lose our nerve, we lose our courage, we lose our focus. We try hard, but we don't always meet what we want to be. This gospel could be read as sort of a pretty pessimistic take. Well, we're always going to be messing up, so why bother? And what I'd like to point us to is how, even in this Holy Week, when we are reflecting on how regularly and perhaps embarrassingly we fail Jesus, how much Jesus still loves us, how much God working through Jesus still loves us. Still love Judas, still love Peter, still loves John, still loves us. So right before this scene in John is the washing of the feet. Remember that just before this happens, as Jesus knows what Judas is going to do, Jesus humiliates himself by washing Judas's feet as well as Peter and John's feet. If we're thinking about communion, we can think about Judas was at the Last Supper. Jesus did not deny communion to Judas or to Peter. There's a way in which sort of the last act of love that Jesus gives is a piece of bread to Judas here in this Gospel of John. Jesus never stops loving Judas. Jesus never stops loving Peter either. What seems to make the difference is being able to receive that love, and receive that love, this humiliating love of God made present in Jesus, in the form of forgiveness, in the form of acknowledgement of the ways in which we've failed, and in the form of God's grace, which goes beyond the worst thing we've ever done in our life and the usual everyday mess ups that we have. So interestingly, the lectionary gives us this text, and the lectionary obviously has edited it a bit to make it focus on this act of betrayal. But if you look in John at the two verses that today's lectionary gospel leaves out, they're pretty important. It says, Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. This is a hymn we chant at Holy Thursday during the washing of the feet, and next year when we're back together, we'll again. I give you a new command to love one another as I have loved you. Well, how has Jesus loved us? By getting down on his knees and dressing up like a servant and washing our feet, by feeding the very person he knows is going to turn him over to the authorities shortly, by being patient with Peter's best intentions and the gap between Peter's best intentions and the reality of Peter's sometimes flawed discipleship. God loves us enough to make a fool of God's self. God loves us enough to get down on the ground with us. And that love is possible because God knows, and we know through Jesus, that that love is bigger than the worst thing we've done. And that love is bigger than the usual messed up, mixed up, embarrassingly consistent in our failures Christians that we are. Today's collect, the opening prayer, says, Almighty ever-living God, grant us to so celebrate the mysteries of the Lord's passion that we may merit to receive your pardon. The difference between Peter and Judas is not that God's loved one and didn't love the other. It's not that God was willing to forgive one and to not forgive the other. It was their ability to receive God's forgiveness. That's perhaps part of our prayer for Holy Week. It's my prayer for Holy Week, that we'll be able to receive that forgiveness.